Welcome back to the frontier, travelers. Pull up a chair and turn up the volume because today's journey takes us to the far reaches of the galaxy, where love is rare and danger is constant. If you appreciate good stories and the old code of honor, hit that like button and subscribe. The air on Acheron V tasted like rust and regret. It was a thick metallic tang that clung to the back of Rusty Vance's throat, a constant reminder that he was breathing filtered poison on a rock that God had forgotten to finish. The moon was a scarred sphere of gray dust and jagged open-pit mines that bled a faint chemical glow under the indifferent gaze of a distant white dwarf star. This wasn't a frontier. It was a wound in the fabric of space, and men like him were just maggots feeding on the decay. Rusty leaned against the pitted, scarred hull of the Betsy, his home and his only real companion. The old freighter's metal was cool against the worn leather of his jacket, a familiar anchor in a universe that offered few of them. He took a slow drag from a synth cigarette, the cherry-red tip flaring like a dying ember in the perpetual twilight. From his vantage point on the landing pad, the mining settlement of Nocturne 9 sprawled out below like a mechanical disease, a chaotic tangle of prefabricated habitats, flickering neon signs advertising cheap liquor and cheaper company, and the ever-present gut-shaking groan of ore processors crushing rock into wealth for a man he'd never meet. Through the small audio implant behind his ear, the mournful cry of a guitar solo filled his head, a relic from old Earth, a wailing blues track about a man who'd lost everything. It was his ritual, a way to build a wall of familiar sound between himself and the oppressive silence of the void. "You're brooding again." A dry, synthesized voice crackled from the comms unit on his wrist. The sound cut through the music with surgical precision. "My internal atmospheric sensors are detecting a significant spike in melancholic sighs. It's putting a strain on my secondary processors." Rusty took another long pull from the cigarette, letting the smoke curl from his lips before he spoke. "Just admiring the view, Betsy." "The view is a monument to industrial misery and poor life choices," the ship's AI retorted with no hint of irony. "There are precisely 3 things to do in Nocturne: drink yourself blind at the void, lose your hard-earned credits in a rigged Sayback game, or get shanked in an alley for the boots on your feet. We've been here for 3 rotations, and I'm starting to feel my outer paint peel from sheer boredom and atmospheric acidity. We needed the fuel cells." "Vex Corps' syndicate pays well for clean couriers," Rusty said, his voice a low baritone rumble that seemed to carry the weight of countless light years. He was here for a simple cargo haul, transporting refined quantium ore to the Zenthari system. A milk run. The kind of job that paid the bills and, more importantly, kept him moving. Moving was the only thing that kept the ghosts quiet. He flicked the spent cigarette into the gray dust, where it sizzled out with a pathetic hiss. He didn't come to places like Acheron V for the scenery or the company. He came because they were anonymous, forgettable waypoints in the vast, lonely darkness. Places where no one knew his name, and more importantly, no one knew the name of the woman he'd failed, the promise he'd broken. "Fine," Betsy conceded. "Let's just load the ore and get back to the black. The sooner we put this celestial slag heap in our rear view, the better. And for the love of the Maker, try not to find any trouble. My port stabilizer is still acting up from that mess on Praxos Delta." "No trouble," Rusty muttered, more to himself than to the ship. He pushed off the hull and started down the ramp toward the settlement, his heavy boots kicking up little puffs of metallic dust. His path led him to the greamiest cantina in the settlement, the very place Betsy had named, the Void. Its holographic sign flickered erratically, casting long, dancing shadows that made the alleyways look like hungry, waiting mouths. The moment he pushed through the whining pneumatic doors, the stench hit him, a thick cocktail of sweat, spilled booze, cheap ozone from the flickering lights, and raw desperation. It was the universal perfume of broken men, miners with hollowed-out eyes and crude cybernetic limbs crowded around circular tables, their faces illuminated by the ghostly glow of gambling machines. The air hummed with a dozen different languages and the low thrum of a bass-heavy synth track that had no soul. Rusty slid onto a stool at the far end of the bar, the synthwood groaning a protest under his considerable weight. He was a big man, built like a freighter's bulkhead, all hard muscle and solid, unyielding presence. His face, handsome in a rugged, worn-in way that spoke of too many fights and too few nights of peaceful sleep, was shadowed by the brim of his hat. He ordered a glass of Corethian whiskey, a liquid that looked like engine coolant and burned twice as much, and nursed it. letting the cantina's low-frequency drone wash over him. He was a ghost here, just another transient shadow passing through. That's when he heard the whispers. They came from a pair of grizzled miners hunched over a table nearby, their voices low and raspy, caked with the same dust that covered their faces. Swears he saw her. One of them, a man with a scarred cheek named Thaldrin, hissed. He leaned in conspiratorially, his eyes wide, through the armored viewport of the Baron's private spire. Said she was otherworldly, beautiful, like something out of an old-world myth. "You're full of reactor sludge, Thaldrin," the other miner scoffed, taking a swig of his drink. "Vex Core keeps his prized possession under tighter lock than the Syndicate's vault. No one sees the Serpent Queen." The name sent a strange, low vibration through Rusty's bones, cutting through the whiskey's burn and the cantina's noise. Serpent Queen. It didn't sound like a person. It sounded like a legend, a fairy tale told to scare children in the dark sectors. "He calls her his good luck charm," Thaldrin continued, his voice dropping to a near-inaudible whisper that Rusty had to strain to hear. "They say she's the last of her kind, the last queen of a dead world in the Xanthari system, that her bloodline is tied to the very core of the planets, that she can commune with them. Sing to the rock," he says. Rusty's hand, which had been loosely holding his glass, tightened. The knuckles went white. He'd seen men like Baron Vex Core before, petty tyrants who built their empires on the backs of the broken and the enslaved. But this was different. Caging a woman, treating her like a piece of mining equipment, forcing her to be a dowsing rod for his insatiable greed. It stirred something cold and ancient and furious in his gut. It felt too much like a different cage, one he had failed to open so long ago. "You promised, Rusty. You promised you'd come back for me." The memory struck him like a physical blow, sharp and debilitating. A woman's voice, clear as a bell in the cacophony of his mind, full of a trust he had shattered. He squeezed his eyes shut for a second, the cantina's noise fading to a dull, distant roar. The broken promise wasn't just a memory, it was a brand on his soul. A failure so profound it had sent him fleeing to the blackest corners of the galaxy, hoping to outrun the sound of his own name. He had chosen the mission over her. He had told himself it was the honorable thing to do. He had been wrong. He opened his eyes. The whiskey in his glass seemed to mock him. Thaldrin and his friend had moved on to complaining about their pay, the legend of the Serpent Queen already forgotten. But for Rusty, the story was now burned into his mind. He threw a handful of credits on the bar, the metal clinking loudly in the sudden clarity of his thoughts. He stood up, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the grimy floor. The decision had already been made. It hadn't formed in his mind with logic and reason. It had bloomed in that deep, quiet place where a man's honor resides. The part of him he thought had died years ago. He couldn't fix the past. He couldn't go back and undo the choice that haunted his every waking moment and soured every dream. But he could do this. As he pushed back out into the cold, artificial twilight of Nocturne 9, he felt a familiar, dangerous sense of purpose settle over him like a heavy coat. He wasn't a hero. Heroes saved people and got the girl. He was just a man who carried a debt, a cosmic IOU written in blood and tears. Tonight, on this forgotten piece of rock, he'd seen a chance to pay a small installment. He keyed the comm on his wrist, the sound of his own steady breathing loud in his ear. "Betsy, scrap the cargo contract with Vex Core. Send them a corrupted data file and blame it on a solar flare. We're changing our plans." There was a moment of digital silence, pregnant with disapproval. It was followed by a long, weary sigh that sounded remarkably human. "Oh no, you have that sound in your voice. The I'm about to do something noble and incredibly stupid sound. It always costs me a new stabilizer or a patch to my hull plating. What is it this time? A three-legged Syrixian kitten stuck up a radio tower? A beautiful widow being cheated out of her land deed?" Rusty looked up, his gaze fixing on the Baron's spire. It was a black, arrogant needle piercing the polluted sky, its peak adorned with a single, brightly lit window, a cage posing as a penthouse. "Something like that," he said, his voice grim and resolute. "Get the weapon systems online, full power to the shields, and find me a schematic of Vex Core's fortress. I want to know every vent, every guard patrol, every weakness." "Just when I thought we were going to have a quiet, profitable week," Betsy lamented, though he could hear the faint hum of systems powering up in the background. She always complained, but she never disobeyed. "I'm routing the power. Try not to get yourself killed, you sentimental old fool. Replacing you would be a logistical nightmare and the paperwork is dreadful." Rusty didn't reply. He was already moving, melting into the shadows that clung to the edges of the settlement. The mournful blues song in his ear had been replaced by a driving rock anthem, a song about rebellion and breaking chains. For the first time in years, the ghosts of his past were silent, respectfully stepping aside for the living. He was going to free the Serpent Queen or die trying. Maybe, just maybe, it would be enough. The fortress of Baron Vexcor was a monument to paranoia. It rose from the center of Nocturne 9 like a black jagged tooth, its sheer walls of obsidian-laced alloy designed to repel orbital bombardment and discourage ground assaults. Searchlights sliced through the perpetual gloom, their beams crawling over the metallic surfaces like sterile robotic insects. Rusty watched from the shadows of a derelict ore hauler, a good half-kilometer away, the driving beat of a classic rock anthem pulsing in his ear, a steady rhythm against the frantic drumming of his own heart. "You're insane," Betsy's voice stated flatly through his comm. "Let me rephrase. You are a statistically significant deviation from rational behavior. There are over 200 armed guards in that spire, not including automated defense turrets and a particularly nasty-looking patrol of Xyler-class combat drones. The schematics I pulled show only one primary entrance, and it's guarded by a magnetic pulse checkpoint. That's why we're not using the entrance," Rusty murmured, his eyes tracing a path up the spire's monstrous height. He was scanning for his target, a series of thermal exhaust ports running up the western face, shielded by maintenance grills. They were a relic of older, less efficient power core designs, a flaw in an otherwise perfect fortress, an oversight born of arrogance. "The thermal ports," Betsy said, a note of digital resignation in her tone. "Of course. A 30-centimeter wide opening, 300 meters straight up, with superheated plasma cycled through it every 15 minutes. What could possibly go wrong? You've got the timing. Just tell me when to move," Rusty said, checking the charge on his magnetic grappling launcher. He adjusted the fit of his worn leather vest over his tactical armor. It was an old habit, the feel of the familiar leather a small comfort in the face of overwhelming odds. He waited, every muscle coiled. The wind whipped dust and grit around him, stinging his exposed skin. The rock and roll in his ear faded, replaced by Betsy's calm, metronomic countdown. Purge cycle beginning in 10, 9, 8. At 3, Rusty broke from cover, a fleeting shadow against the industrial wasteland. He ran with the powerful, ground-eating strides of a man who knew that hesitation was death. At 1, he fired the grappling launcher. The magnetic hook shot upwards with a sharp thwump, trailing a microcarbon filament. It slammed into the grill above the first exhaust port with a solid, satisfying clang. "Cycle complete. You have 14 minutes until the next plasma flush," Betsy informed him. Rusty didn't waste a second. He hit the ascent trigger, and the winch zipped him upwards, his boots scraping against the sheer wall. The ground fell away with terrifying speed. He was a spider climbing a black thread, exposed and vulnerable. Below, the settlement was a circuit board of flickering lights. Above, only the cold, uncaring stars. He reached the first grill, his muscles already burning from the tension. He pulled a plasma cutter from his belt, the tool's high-pitched whine slicing through the silence. The metal of the grill glowed cherry red, then white, before he kicked the weakened section inward and scrambled through the opening. The maintenance shaft was narrow, dark, and slick with chemical residue. It smelled of ozone and hot metal. He moved upwards, a grim vertical crawl through the guts of the spire. He moved from shaft to shaft, guided by Betsy's voice and the schematics now glowing in his visor's heads-up display. Twice, he had to freeze, pressing himself into the shadows, as guard patrols passed by on adjacent corridors, their heavy footsteps echoing through the metal walls. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic counterpoint to the steady rock music he'd switched back on. It kept him focused, kept the fear at arm's length. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of climbing and hiding, he reached the penthouse level. "I'm here, Betsy. Cut the internal comms on this floor." "Done," she confirmed. "Local security cameras are on a loop. You have approximately 6 minutes before the system automatically flags the anomaly. Make them count." Rusty pried open a final service panel and slipped into a richly carpeted hallway. The contrast was jarring. The air here was clean, tasting faintly of recycled oxygen and expensive perfume. The walls were adorned with alien artifacts and ostentatious art. It was the den of a predator, decorated with the bones of its prey. The Queen's chamber was at the end of the hall, guarded by 2 elite sentinels in gleaming chrome armor, pulse rifles held at the ready. Rusty didn't hesitate. He emerged from the shadows like a wraith, a silent, brutal force of nature. He took the first guard down with a swift, crippling blow to the back of the neck. The man crumpled without a sound. The second guard turned, his eyes widening in surprise, but he was too slow. Rusty's fist connected with his helmet in a sickening crunch of plastoid and bone. He swiped a keycard from one of the downed guards and pressed it against the door panel. It hissed open, revealing the room beyond. And there she was. The whispers hadn't done her justice. She was breathtaking, not in a soft, delicate way, but with the fierce, untamed beauty of a desert storm. Her name was Nyxara. She was tall and regal, with skin the color of twilight lavender, marked with faint, iridescent patterns that shimmered like scales under the soft light. Her hair was a cascade of silver-white silk, and her eyes were the color of molten gold, almond-shaped and tilted upwards, holding an ancient, sorrowful intelligence. 2 small, elegant horns, like polished obsidian, curved back from her temples. She was every inch a queen. She was also a prisoner. She stood in the center of the opulent room, encased in a shimmering golden cage of pure energy. It hummed with contained power, casting a warm, cruel glow on her beautiful face. Her golden eyes snapped to his, and for a moment, the world fell away. There was no fear in her gaze, only a weary defiance and a flicker of something else, a spark of stunned disbelief. He saw his own solitude reflected in her eyes, the profound loneliness of a soul set apart. The connection between them was instantaneous, a silent, powerful current passing through the bars of her energy cage. It was a recognition of kindred spirits, forged in the crucible of their shared captivity, his of the past, hers of the present. He gave her a slow, deliberate nod, a promise, without words. He approached the console that controlled the energy field. "Don't," she said, her voice a low, melodic whisper that vibrated in the air. "You don't know what you're doing. My freedom comes at a price." "Everything worth having does," Rusty replied, his fingers flying over the console. Betsy was already in his ear, feeding him the override codes. The system was complex, layered with failsafes. A klaxon began to blare, a harsh metallic scream that shattered the room's tranquility. "Too late." Betsy's voice was tense. "They know you're here. Hostiles converging on your position." "Almost there," Rusty muttered, sweat beading on his forehead. The final encryption sequence flashed on the screen. He slammed his palm onto the main panel. With a deafening shriek of collapsing energy, the golden field vanished. For a second, Nyxara stumbled, her hand going to her head as if dizzy. The sudden absence of the field's pressure was disorienting. Rusty was already moving, grabbing her arm. Her skin was cool, smooth as polished stone. "This way," he commanded, pulling her toward the massive window that overlooked the settlement. "The window? We're 1,000 meters up," she protested, her voice regaining its strength. "The fall's not so bad," Rusty grunted, smashing the butt of his pistol against the armored glass. It spiderwebbed but held. "It's the sudden stop at the end." He attached a small, powerful breaching charge to the fractured pane. "Get back!" He pulled her behind a large, ornate sofa as the charge detonated with a deafening boom, blowing the window outward into the night. Wind howled into the room, whipping at their clothes. "You are mad," Nyxara breathed, her silver hair flying around her face. But there was a hint of a smile on her lips, a spark of exhilaration in her golden eyes. Rusty already had the grappling line hooked to a support beam. He clipped a secondary harness around her waist. "Hold on tight," he ordered, his voice barely audible over the wind and the approaching stomp of armored boots. He scooped her into his arms, she was surprisingly light, and leaped out into the screaming void. The city lights of Nocturne rushed up to meet them, a dizzying, terrifying spectacle. The winch on the grappler screamed in protest as it lowered them at a controlled, but brutally fast, pace. Pulse rifle blasts sizzled through the air around them, striking the spire's wall in showers of sparks. Nyxara wrapped her arms around his neck, her face buried in his shoulder. He could feel the warmth of her body against his, a fragile, living presence in the cold, mechanical night. In that moment, plummeting through the darkness with a queen in his arms and an army at his back, Rusty Vance felt more alive than he had in a decade. They hit the ground hard, rolling to dissipate the impact. He didn't give her time to recover. He pulled her to her feet and they ran, zigzagging through the dark, labyrinthine alleys of the settlement. The sounds of pursuit echoed behind them. The ramp of the Betsy was down, its interior lights a beacon of sanctuary in the chaos. "It's about time," Betsy's voice shrieked over the ship's external speakers. "My hull is being peppered with stray weapons fire. This is coming out of your share." They scrambled up the ramp, Rusty firing his blaster back at the approaching guards, providing covering fire. The ramp hissed shut behind them, sealing them in. "Get us out of here, Betsy! Now!" Rusty yelled, helping Nyxara into a crash couch. The ship's engines roared to life, shaking the very ground. With a gut-wrenching lurch, the Betsy lifted off, blasting a cloud of dust and debris at Vex Corps' stunned forces. The ship climbed, banking hard as it soared into the polluted skies of Acheron Fear. In the cockpit, Rusty took the controls, his hands moving with practiced ease. On the screen, he could see Vex Corps' fighters scrambling from the spire, angry fireflies chasing them into the black. A tense, desperate dance through the stars had just begun. "I want to hear from you veterans out there. If you were in Rusty's shoes, would you risk it all for a new love, or would you stay focused on the mission? Write it down in the comments. I read everyone." The chase was a brutal ballet danced across the void. Vex Corps' fighters were sleek, arrowhead-shaped interceptors, faster and more agile than the aging, bulked-up Betsy. They nipped at her heels like starved hounds, their pulse cannons stitching lines of angry green energy across the blackness. Inside the cockpit, the ship groaned and shuddered with every near miss and evasive maneuver. Red alert klaxons blared, and the acrid smell of ozone from overloaded power conduits filled the air. Rusty's hands were a blur on the control yoke, his knuckles white. He pushed the old freighter to her absolute limits, weaving through the asteroid-choked tendrils of the Viridian expanse. Chunks of ice and rock, some as big as small moons, became his only allies. He'd duck behind a spinning asteroid, the ship's hull screaming as stray ice crystals scraped against its shields, only to emerge on a new trajectory, momentarily confusing their pursuers. "Shields at 40%! Betsy's voice was strained, losing its sarcastic edge to the urgency of survival. "I'm diverting auxiliary power, but the port engine's capacitor is overheating. If you singe my wiring, Rusty, I'll never forgive you." Nyxara was strapped into the co-pilot seat, her golden eyes wide but surprisingly calm. She watched the chaos of the dogfight not with fear, but with a kind of focused intensity, as if she were committing every detail to memory. She didn't flinch when a plasma bolt scorched the viewport, leaving a spiderweb of fractured transparasteel just meters from her face. Her stillness was a strange anchor in the violent storm of their escape. "There," she said suddenly, her melodic voice cutting through the alarms. She pointed a slender, lavender-hued finger at a section of the star chart on the main console. It was a patch of space marked as an anomaly, a gravitational distortion zone. "Head for that nebula, Praxos Delta. It is a place of quiet." Rusty glanced at her, then at the coordinates. The nebula was a swirling mass of incandescent gas and stellar dust, a graveyard of old stars. It was treacherous, a navigator's nightmare. It was also perfect. "Betsy, plot a course. Get ready for a rough ride." "My diagnostics are already screaming at me," the AI grumbled, but the course was laid in seconds. Rusty wrenched the Betsy into a hard dive, plunging them toward the vibrant, chaotic clouds of the nebula. Vex Corps' fighters followed, relentless. As they entered the swirling gases, the ship was buffeted by electromagnetic currents. The sensors went haywire, and the view outside became a mesmerizing, deadly kaleidoscope of color. "I'm losing their signatures," Betsy announced, a hint of triumph in her voice. "The nebula's interference is scrambling their targeting systems. And ours. Just keep us in one piece," Rusty grunted, fighting the controls as the ship bucked like a wild animal. He flew blind, guided by instinct and Nyxara's quiet directions. She seemed to feel the currents of the nebula, pointing out safe passages and warning him of gravitational eddies that would have torn the Betsy apart. It was as if she could hear the music of the cosmos, a symphony he was deaf to. After a final, gut-twisting maneuver through a narrow canyon of glowing hydrogen, they broke through into a pocket of serene, clear space. Before them hung a single, small moon, bathed in the soft, ethereal light of the surrounding nebula. Praxos Delta. It was a lush green world, an impossible sanctuary hidden within the stellar storm. Rusty guided the battered Betsy down, landing her in a secluded valley beside a crystal-clear waterfall that cascaded into a turquoise lake. When the engines finally powered down, the silence was absolute, broken only by the gentle sound of the waterfall and the distant call of an alien bird. For a long moment, Rusty and Nyxara just sat there breathing. The adrenaline began to recede, leaving behind a profound sense of exhaustion and a fragile shared peace. Over the next few days, as Betsy ran her lengthy self-repair diagnostics, the hidden moon became their haven. The frantic escape gave way to a quiet intimacy. They were two solitary souls adrift in the universe who had found a temporary shore in each other. Rusty watched her as she walked barefoot along the edge of the lake, the strange multicolored light of the nebula reflecting in her silver hair. She seemed to draw strength from the natural world, a vibrancy returning to her that had been suppressed in Vex Corps' cage. He found himself talking more than he had in years, telling her about his life as a freighter pilot, about the freedom of the open void and the loneliness that came with it. He played her his old rock music, and she listened with a curious, enchanting smile, her head tilted as she tried to understand the raw human emotion pouring from the ship's speakers. She, in turn, told him of her people, the Zenthari. She spoke of a civilization that lived in harmony with their planet, a bond so deep that the life force of the ruler was intrinsically linked to the health of the world itself. She described cities of living crystal and forests of light, all of it now gone, silenced. Vex Corps hadn't just imprisoned her. He'd captured the last living echo of a dead world. One evening, they sat by a crackling fire Rusty had built near the ship, the flames painting flickering shadows on their faces. The sky above was a breathtaking tapestry of swirling purple, green, and gold. "Why did you do it, Rusty Vance?" she asked softly, her golden eyes searching his. "Why risk your life for a stranger?" Rusty stared into the fire, the flames dancing in his dark eyes. The question was a key, unlocking a door he had kept bolted for a decade. He found himself telling her about the broken promise. He spoke of another woman, on another world caught in a crossfire, a civilian caught in a war he was fighting in. He had been a soldier then, not a hauler. He had promised to come back for her, to get her out. But orders had come down. The strategic retreat was absolute. He had chosen his duty over his promise, and by the time he'd defied orders and gone back for her, the city was glass. "I told myself it was honor," he said, his voice thick with the pain that time had not dulled. "Duty. But it was just a choice, and I chose wrong. I left her in a cage and I never got to go back." He looked up at Nyxara, his gaze raw and vulnerable. "When I saw you, I couldn't make that choice again." Nyxara reached out, her cool, slender fingers gently touching his scarred hand. It was a simple gesture, but it carried a universe of understanding. "You did not fail your honor, Rusty. You are trying to mend it. It is the heaviest burden a man can carry." In that moment, under the painted sky of a forgotten moon, something shifted between them. The camaraderie forged in danger deepened into something more profound. He leaned in and she met him halfway. The kiss was gentle at first, a hesitant question, but then it deepened, filled with all the unspoken loneliness, the shared pain, and the desperate, fleeting hope for connection that had brought them to this place. It was a kiss that tasted of starlight and regret, of new beginnings and inevitable endings. They spent the night together, not in a fever of passion, but in a slow, tender exploration. It was a communion of two souls who had been alone for too long. In the quiet darkness of the Betsy's cabin, with the light of the nebula painting soft colors on their skin, Rusty felt a piece of his fractured heart begin to heal. But peace, like all things in his life, was temporary. The next morning, as they watched the nebula's colors shift with the moon's rotation, Nyxara's expression grew somber. She took his hand, her golden eyes filled with a sorrow so deep it seemed to swallow the light. "I was not entirely truthful with you, Rusty," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "My freedom does not just come at a price. It is the price." Rusty felt a cold dread creep into his veins. "What are you talking about?" "The bond between the ruler of Zentharis and the planet is absolute," she explained, her grip tightening on his hand. "My ancestors learned to preserve our world, to rejuvenate it after cosmic calamities. When my world died, my life became a seed, a vessel holding the last spark of its essence, waiting. Vex Corps thought he was using me as a tool, but all he did was keep the seed dormant in its cage." She turned to face him fully, and he saw the terrible, beautiful truth in her eyes. "By freeing me, you have initiated the final ritual, the Great Communion. I must go to my dead world. There, I will give myself back to it. My life force, my spirit, will be the spark that reignites its core. My physical form will be consumed, and my consciousness will become one with the planet. I will be its queen, but not as a woman, as a world. The words hit Rusty with the force of a physical blow. He had just found her. He had just allowed himself to feel something again, to hope. And now she was telling him she was going to disappear. No, he said, his voice a hoarse rasp. There has to be another way. This is the way, she said gently, but with the unyielding finality of a queen accepting her destiny. It is not a death, Rusty. It is a transformation. My people will live again through me. It is the greatest honor of my bloodline. You have not just freed a woman from a cage. You have given a dead world back its soul. He looked at her, at this incredible, regal woman who was willing to sacrifice everything for her home. He saw now that he had been a pawn in a much grander cosmic design. His personal quest for redemption had triggered a universal act of creation. He had freed her, only to lose her in the most absolute way imaginable. Suddenly, a blaring alarm shattered the tranquil valley. "Rusty!" Betsy's voice screamed through the comm. "Multiple ships just dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the nebula. It's Vex Corps' fleet. They've found us." Rusty looked from the approaching threat on the tactical display to the impossible choice standing before him. He could run, try to save the woman he was beginning to love, and in doing so, doom her world and her purpose forever. Or he could protect her sacrifice, fight for her transformation, and be left utterly and completely alone once more. His redemption, he realized, was not in freeing her. It was in letting her go. The idyllic peace of Praxos Delta shattered like glass. Vex Corps' fleet emerged from the swirling mists of the nebula, not with the cautious probe of a search party, but with the brutal, overwhelming force of an execution squad. A heavy cruiser, the Iron Tyrant, led the charge, flanked by a swarm of the same vicious interceptors they had outrun before. They weren't here to recapture their prize. They were here to annihilate it. "He's not trying to hail us," Rusty said, his voice a low, dangerous growl as he strapped himself into the pilot's seat. The cockpit of the Betsy was bathed in the red glow of combat alerts. "He's going to glass this moon to make sure she can't complete her ritual." Nyxara stood behind him, her hand resting on his shoulder. Her touch was a steady, calming pressure against the storm of violence erupting on the view screen. "You must get me to Xantheris. It is the only place the communion can be completed." "Xantheris is on the other side of that fleet," Rusty stated grimly, his fingers dancing across the console, diverting all remaining power to the engines and forward shields. "Betsy, give me everything you've got. We're punching through." "I'm a cargo hauler, not a battleship," the AI protested, her voice tight with digital panic. "My hull is rated for micrometeoroids, not capital-grade laser cannons. This is decidedly outside of my operational parameters." "Improvise," Rusty ordered. The Betsy shuddered as her engines roared to life, lifting them from the tranquil valley and into the crosshairs of a waiting fleet. The first volley from the Iron Tyrant struck the moon where they had been moments before, turning the beautiful waterfall and turquoise lake into a crater of incandescent, molten rock. "He knows," Nyxara whispered, her voice filled with a chilling certainty. "He knows what I am. He's not afraid of me. He's afraid of a reborn Xantheris becoming a power in this sector. He would rather I remain a legend than become a rival." Rusty's jaw was set like granite. He pushed the throttle forward, sending the old freighter hurtling directly toward the blockade. It was a madman's charge, a single battered wolf against a pack of starving hounds. The interceptors swarmed them, their pulse cannons spitting a web of green energy. "Rusty, they're targeting our engines," Betsy shrieked. "Let them," Rusty said, his eyes narrowed in concentration. At the last possible second, he cut the main thrusters and fired the ventral retro rockets, throwing the Betsy into a wild, tumbling spin. The volley of enemy fire meant for their engines shot harmlessly past them. He then reignited the mains, using the spin's momentum to slingshot them under the belly of the Iron Tyrant. For a terrifying moment, they were flying in the shadow of the massive cruiser, so close he could see the individual armor plates and gun emplacements. It was the one place the ship's main cannons couldn't target them. "His fighters won't risk firing on their own flagship's hull," Rusty explained, the plan forming in his mind as fast as he could execute it. He was a master of asymmetrical warfare, the art of making a weakness a weapon. He flew the Betsy like a matador's cape, using the cruiser's own bulk to shield them from the swarming fighters. The jump coordinates for Xantharis are locked in, Nyxara said, her voice steady. But the hyperspace drive needs time to charge, time we may not have. As if on cue, the cruiser began launching boarding torpedoes, heavy, armored pods designed to punch through a ship's hull and disgorge squads of soldiers. Betsy, activate the dorsal turret. Slave it to my controls, Rusty commanded. He relinquished manual flight to the ship's thrusters for a moment, his hands moving to the weapons console. A targeting reticle appeared on his screen. He tracked the first torpedo and fired. The Betsy's old, reliable kinetic cannons barked, a twin slug of superheated metal slamming into the torpedo and turning it into a blossoming fireball. He caught two more, but a fourth one got through, striking the aft cargo bay with a deafening metallic scream of tearing hull. Hull breach in cargo bay 2, Betsy announced. Boarders detected. Nyxara, get to the engine room, Rusty ordered, his eyes never leaving the view screen as he dodged another volley of fire. Seal the door behind you. The communion is all that matters. I'll hold them off. She hesitated, her golden eyes meeting his in the reflection of the console. The unspoken words hung between them, a universe of feeling in a fleeting, stolen moment. Your honor is mended, Rusty Vance, she whispered. Then, she was gone. Rusty grabbed his heavy pulse rifle from the weapons locker. He could hear the grinding of the boarders cutting through the internal bulkhead. He switched on his private comm, the familiar chords of a hard-driving rock anthem flooding his senses, a battle hymn for a final desperate stand. The bulkhead door exploded inward. Vex Corps soldiers clad in black combat armor poured through the opening. Rusty met them with a storm of controlled bursts from his rifle, using the corridor's narrow confines as a choke point. The first two soldiers went down. He fell back, sealing one door after another, turning the ship's corridors into a deadly maze. It was a fighting retreat, a bloody inch-by-inch battle to buy Nyxara the precious seconds she needed. A plasma bolt seared past his head, scorching the bulkhead next to him. He was out of ammo. He dropped the rifle and drew the heavy, custom-made magnum from the holster on his thigh. He was a better shot with the pistol anyway. Back in the cockpit, Betsy was fighting her own battle. Hyperspace drive at 80%. Rusty, the cruiser is maneuvering. It's going to ram us. Through the viewport, the colossal mass of the iron tyrant loomed, growing larger with terrifying speed. Rusty fired his last two shots, taking down another soldier before slamming the final bulkhead door to the cockpit section and engaging the magnetic locks. He threw himself back into the pilot's seat. 95%, Betsy screamed. The cruiser filled the entire screen. He could see the bridge, see the silhouetted figure of Vex Corps himself, watching his imminent triumph. Just as the shadow of the tyrant fell over them, a soft, emerald light began to emanate from the back of the ship. It pulsed a gentle, cosmic heartbeat. Nyxara had begun. Now, Rusty, her voice echoed, not through the comms, but directly in his mind. It was a voice of pure energy, of starlight and nebula dust. Jump, the drive whined, hitting 100%. Rusty slammed his hand down on the activation lever. The universe outside the viewport dissolved into a chaotic tunnel of swirling, incandescent blue. The Betsy, battered and bleeding atmosphere, leaped into hyperspace a microsecond before the iron tyrant would have crushed it into scrap metal. The transition was violent. The damaged ship screamed in protest. When they dropped back into normal space, they were hanging in the silent void before a dead world. Xantharis. It was a gray, lifeless orb, its surface scarred by ancient cataclysms, its atmosphere long since stripped away. The emerald light from the engine room intensified, bathing the entire ship in its glow. Rusty felt Nyxara's presence swell, a wave of warmth and gratitude and profound love washing through him. He saw images in his mind, her memories of a vibrant, living world, the faces of her people, the taste of fruit from trees of light. He felt her sorrow and her hope. Thank you, my cowboy, her voice whispered in his soul. You gave them back their future. You gave me back my purpose. The light surged, pouring out of the Betsy's breached hull. It was a river of pure life, a torrent of emerald spirit that streamed from the ship and struck the dead heart of the planet. Rusty watched, breathless, as the energy wave washed over the gray sphere. Where it touched, the ground shimmered. Faint lines of light, like glowing veins, began to spread across the continents. A soft green luminescence began to glow from within the planet's core, a world soul being reignited. The light in the ship faded. The presence in his mind receded, leaving behind an aching, hollow silence. He knew with absolute certainty that her physical body was gone. Nyxara, the woman, was no more. He was alone. Again. He slumped in his chair, the adrenaline leaving him weak and empty. His body ached. His ship was a wreck. But as he looked at the nascent glowing world of Zentharis, a single difficult tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek. He had kept his promise this time. He had seen it through to the end. His redemption was paid for with a broken heart, but his honor was, at last, intact. He turned the battered Betsy away from the miracle he had helped create and pointed her nose toward the endless, lonely darkness of the frontier. The rock and roll was silent. For now, the only sound was the quiet hum of a single engine and the steady, solitary beat of a mended but empty heart. The universe had demanded its price, and he had paid it in full. True honor isn't found in avoiding past mistakes, but in facing new ones with integrity, even when the personal cost is everything. Redemption is not a destination, but a journey paid for with sacrifice. The road is long and lonely, but it's better when we travel it together. If this story touched you, subscribe and share it with a friend who appreciates the old code of honor.